Sabora Gagani was born on September 14, 1991, in Tirana, Albania. At some point, Sabora's parents separated, and shortly afterward, her mother, Elisabetta, decided to move away with her children, relocating to Rome, Italy. There, Elisabetta worked tirelessly to raise her children on her own. Sabora was known for her cheerful disposition and quickly became popular among her school friends, who affectionately called her Sibi. She was a strikingly beautiful young woman with dark skin, tall and slender, with long, flowing hair and an energetic personality. Sabora enjoyed spending time with friends, attending parties, and listening to music at high volumes. According to her mother, she had a deep love for children and dreamed of becoming a teacher. However, she was also drawn to the world of modeling and took her first step in that direction by competing and winning a regional beauty contest. Despite her modeling aspirations, Sabora's family needed financial support, so she began working as a waitress in a local restaurant, where she quickly earned everyone's affection. Fate took a turn when Sabora was 18 years old and met Marco, a 31-year-old tall, handsome, and charming man. Although little is known about him, it was confirmed that he had at least one sister and had been previously married. By the time he met Sabora, he was divorced. Sabora fell deeply in love with Marco, and their feelings were mutual. Unbeknownst to Sabora, Marco had a troubled past. According to those close to him, Marco had a reputation with the local police due to his violent tendencies and issues with drug use. About a year into their relationship, Sabora and Marco informed her family that they had decided to move to Spain, as Marco claimed that there were not enough job opportunities for him in Italy. They planned to settle in Torremolinos, a Spanish municipality in the province of Malaga. Elisabetta was not thrilled about her young daughter moving to another country with a man significantly older than her, but Sabora was an adult, and despite her mother's concerns, the couple went ahead with their plan. Upon arriving in Torremolinos in 2011, Sabora and Marco settled in the beach area of La Carihuela. Initially, the couple appeared happy, and Sabora maintained close contact with her mother, communicating daily by phone or social media. She quickly found work as a waitress in a local restaurant, and Marco secured a job as a cook and pizza maker. However, it soon became evident that the problem was not a lack of opportunities in Italy, but Marco's inability to keep a job, as he couldn't hold down a position in Spain either. As time passed, Marco's true nature began to surface, and jealousy-fueled arguments with Sabora became increasingly frequent. Elisabetta witnessed this firsthand when she visited the couple to see how they were living. During her visit, she noticed that the relationship was deteriorating with bitter and frequent arguments, even in her presence. Over the following months, Sabora returned to Italy several times, with some reports suggesting that she only stayed in Spain during the holiday seasons. It's possible that her return was also influenced by the fact that her residence permit had expired, and she had been using a false Italian identity to travel. By late 2013, nearing the third anniversary of their relationship, Sabora returned to her mother's home and confided that she had left Marco for good. She was tired of trying to make things work and had decided not to return, realizing that the situation was not improving. But soon after, Marco showed up at the family's home, as often happens, swearing that everything would change. He even proposed marriage, and unfortunately, Sabora was swayed by his promises. Things did improve for a while, but eventually, jealousy and violence returned to dominate their relationship. Elisabetta later recalled that her daughter began to feel increasingly frightened. On one occasion, Sabora confided to her mother that if she wanted to leave Marco, she would have to disappear, as he wouldn't let her go otherwise. By June 2014, it seemed clear that any hope for reconciliation between Sabora and Marco had faded. Sabora left the house they shared and moved into an apartment. Once settled, she called her mother, telling her that she had ended things with Marco for good and that she finally felt as free as a butterfly. However, things started to become strange when, in early July, Marco called Elisabetta to ask if Sabora had returned to Italy. Surprised, Elisabetta asked what had happened, and Marco told her that 2 days earlier they had a heated argument, after which Sabora left the house, leaving all her belongings behind. Elisabetta didn't believe his story because Sabora had informed her a month earlier about her move, making it clear that Marco was lying by claiming she had just left 2 days prior. Adding to the worry during all that time, Elisabetta had received no news from her daughter. Deep down, she hoped that Sabora was following through with what she had said, leaving Marco and disappearing. But the situation took a chilling turn when, in a subsequent conversation, Marco told Elisabetta a different version of events. He claimed that a security guard at the residence had seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases, saying she had left without disclosing her destination. This contradicted his earlier statement that she had left without taking anything. The family waited anxiously for Sabora to make contact. They were certain that, even if she wanted to disappear from Marco's life without revealing her whereabouts, she would never completely cut off contact with her siblings, especially her mother. The last time anyone heard from her was on July 7, 2014, when she exchanged a WhatsApp message with Marco. After that, her phone was disconnected and there was no activity on her social media accounts. The following week, Marco traveled to Italy and visited Sabora's family. He shared a coffee with Elisabetta, lamenting the disappearance of his beloved, and spoke with Sabora's brother, expressing disbelief that she had left without explanation, while insisting he had no idea what could have happened to her. During this time, Marco told Elisabetta that he had printed missing person posters and had been placing them around the area. He also claimed that Sabora had been seen boarding a bus, then suggested she might have traveled to Argentina. Additionally, he mentioned hearing that she had been spotted with a dark-skinned man with whom she seemed to be arguing. However, Marco never did the most logical thing, reporting Sabora's disappearance to the authorities. That responsibility fell to Elisabetta, who not only reported her daughter missing, but also suggested that Marco might be involved. The police began an investigation, interviewing Marco as the last person to see her, but he repeated his story. The authorities confirmed that the couple had separated, though it seemed they were still in contact, as some of Sabora's personal belongings were found in the residence. This unsettling situation persisted for the following months. In 2015, in an effort to expand the search for Sabora nationwide, the authorities sought the help of the association dedicated to disseminating information and images of people who have gone missing under unexplained circumstances. Unfortunately, this effort also yielded no results. Sabora's family, however, refused to give up and ensured that Italian media also circulated information about the missing young woman. Life continued for everyone, though in very different ways. While Sabora's family lived with the anguish of not knowing her whereabouts, clinging to the increasingly faint hope that she would return, Marco's life moved on, albeit with the same bad habits. During this time, Marco changed his appearance, shaving his head, growing a beard, and entering into 2 relationships, both of which ended with the women filing complaints against him. Marco remained in Spain, where, to those around him, he appeared to be a normal man, always greeting his neighbors with a smile, a regular at the gym, a fan of target shooting, and a lover of sports like baseball and martial arts. By 2023, 9 years had passed since Sabora's disappearance, and Marco had a new partner, a woman named Paula. What was known about Paula's life was that before Marco, she had been in a stable relationship from which she had a daughter and a son. After the breakup, and once she began living with Marco, they had a child together. One thing that hadn't changed in Marco's life was his instability at work, and over the years he had gone through several jobs. While working at a pizzeria, he became friends with a man named Victor Molina. One day, Marco approached Victor, asking for work, stating that he had been unemployed for a while and that his family was struggling. Victor, willing to help, gave both Marco and Paula jobs at his restaurant, where Victor's sister Victoria had been working until then. Later, Victor even rented an apartment to the couple. Paula proved to be an excellent worker, earning the trust and affection of her employers. However, the same couldn't be said for Marco, with whom Victor had several problems. The last straw came when Victoria arrived at the restaurant one day to find the employee bathroom door completely destroyed. Paula, deeply embarrassed, admitted that Marco had broken the door, accusing her of hiding there to have intimate relations with co-workers. This incident led Victor to transfer Marco to work under his direct supervision at another place. During her time at the restaurant, Paula had earned not only trust as an employee, but also personal affection. Victoria, in particular, knew that the relationship between Marco and Paula was not just troubled, but virtually non-existent. Paula confided that Marco had physically assaulted her. Her employers urged her to report him to the authorities, knowing that with his record, he would likely end up in jail. However, Paula downplayed the incident, claiming it was just 4 punches and a kick. To her employers, this explanation was shocking, but there was an underlying reason why Paula continued living with Marco. She revealed that social services had taken her children away after finding drugs in their home that belonged to Marco. Paula confessed that she wanted to leave Marco, with whom she said she no longer had a romantic relationship, but she lacked the means to do so and needed to maintain the appearance of a stable relationship to regain custody of her children. Since securing a steady job, Paula was closer to achieving that goal. She hoped to save enough money to rent her own place and separate from Marco. She also shared that she had been undergoing weekly drug tests at a clinic for months to prove she was drug-free, and she held out hope that by October of that year she would be reunited with her children. While Marco was working at the new establishment, his performance did not improve, and he lasted only a month and a half. Victor, the owner, discovered that a kitchen knife had gone missing, and he reported the theft to the authorities. Shortly after filing the report, Victor decided to fire Marco. Just a few days after Marco's dismissal, on Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula was in high spirits. It was her day off, and she had plans for the evening. The next day, Wednesday, May 17, 2014, Victoria was looking forward to hearing about Paula's night when she came in for her shift. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Paula was getting ready for work. It was around 11:30 in the morning when loud screams were heard from the apartment shared by Marco and Paula. While it wasn't unusual for the couple to argue, there was something different about Paula's cries this time. Her voice sounded desperate, and she was pleading for help. Victor and another employee immediately rushed upstairs and began pounding on the door, asking what was happening and pleading with Paula to tell them if she was okay. One of the men claimed to have heard faint whimpers in the background. Seconds later, Marco's voice emerged, assuring them that everything was fine and that Paula had just gone back to bed. Paula's voice was no longer heard. The door remained closed, and something in Marco's tone set off alarm bells for the concerned men. Victor ran to fetch a spare key to the apartment from his house, while the other employee went to grab his phone to call the police. Hearing the men leave the door, Marco calmly exited the apartment and left the building. Minutes later, police officers and medical personnel arrived at the scene. They knocked on the door again, but there was no response. Victor unlocked the door for them, and what they found inside was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Lying on the floor was Paula's lifeless body, her clothes stained red with numerous stab wounds. The paramedics could do nothing but pronounce her dead at the scene, and it was clear that the suspected assailant was no longer present. Within minutes, the area was swarming with law enforcement, investigators, and medical personnel. Authorities immediately launched a manhunt for the suspect based on witness statements. The efforts paid off. A local resident identified Marco from the photo at a nearby establishment. Less than 6 hours after the incident, at 5:30 that same evening, Marco was apprehended while calmly drinking a beer. He offered no resistance, and the arrest attracted the attention of everyone present in the establishment and in the surrounding area. Marco was taken to the police station for questioning, while initial reports indicated that Paula had sustained 14 stab wounds to her body. In the days that followed, new details emerged, revealing the extent of Marco's manipulations. It was discovered that on the night Paula went out, Marco had been searching for her, even asking local taxi drivers for information on who had driven her and where she had gone. This was just the tip of the iceberg, as the surprises were far from over. Upon learning of Marco's arrest for the murder of his then-girlfriend, the pain of Cibora's mother, Elisabetta, resurfaced. She once again voiced the plea that had been her cry for many years. Incredibly, Elisabetta's plea was answered almost immediately. As Marco was being escorted through the police station, he stopped in front of a bulletin board displaying images from ongoing investigations. Among them was the missing person poster for Cibora Gagani, whose case had remained open for 9 years. According to the officers, upon seeing the poster, Marco paused and dropped a bombshell. He claimed he wanted to cooperate because the memory of what he had done would haunt him forever. He confessed that he and Cibora had argued, and he had killed her and buried her in an apartment. And not only that, when the officers were still reeling from the shock, Marco offered to show them where he had hidden her body in the apartment they had lived in together. The authorities, cautious of his intentions, did not accept his offer immediately. Returning to the case at hand on Saturday, May 20th, Marco, 45, was formally presented in court. He exercised his right to remain silent and only responded to questions from his defense attorney, who requested a psychiatric and toxicological evaluation for her client in connection with Paula's murder. During this hearing, Marco said nothing about his earlier revelation regarding Cibora's case. The court ordered that Marco be held in provisional custody without bail while being investigated for the crime of murder within the context of gender violence, and that he undergo a drug addiction protocol the same day. It was also noted that the court had reopened the investigation into the disappearance of Cibora Gagani, which had occurred 9 years earlier. From that moment on, investigators set out to determine the truth of Marco's statements made at the police station. Over the next few days, a massive operation was launched. On Monday, May 22nd, officers visited the apartment where Marco and Cibora had once lived. At that time, the apartment was occupied by another couple who were fully cooperative with the authorities. In the following days, specialized teams meticulously searched every inch of the apartment located near the town hall and police station where Cibora's body was allegedly hidden. The search of the apartment began with a visual inspection, looking for any irregularities in the walls or floors, but nothing out of the ordinary was discovered. Subsequent inspections involved the use of densitometers and microcameras. Small holes were drilled throughout various parts of the apartment to insert cameras, and examined the interiors of the walls and floors. However, these efforts did not yield any positive results. According to the press, Marco continued to talk from prison, where he supposedly claimed that he had used acid to dispose of Sabora's remains. Meanwhile, investigators refused to give up, even after 3 fruitless searches of the apartment. During the 4th attempt, officers analyzed the building's floor plans and noticed that 2 identical apartments were located on the same floor. When they visited the twin apartment, they realized that there was a large space in the bedroom that did not match the layout of the apartment under investigation. With this clue, the specialists focused on a particular wall that appeared unaltered and was identical to the rest of the building, but, in reality, concealed a hollow space behind it. With the necessary authorization, on June 6th, the officers broke through the wall. Behind it, they found a large wooden crate filled with lime. As they began removing the lime, the first grim discoveries emerged. The first thing they found was a plastic bag containing a knife with dried blood. Next, they uncovered some objects that apparently belonged to the victim, followed by a bouquet of flowers placed on top of several plastic bags. Inside the bags, they found a camping sleeping bag, and within it, the remains of a woman. Following the gruesome discovery, the body was transported for an autopsy to confirm the cause of death and to establish whether the remains were indeed those of Sabora. Meanwhile, in Italy, Sabora's family was on edge after a friend informed them of Marco's arrest for Paula's murder and the search for Sabora's body. Elisabetta said that the news of her daughter's death at Marco's hands hit her like a bucket of cold water. She revealed that the only joy she had experienced during those years of uncertainty was becoming a grandmother, thanks to her son. She also shared that Sabora's father had passed away due to illness, without ever knowing what had happened to his daughter. Shortly after, Spanish authorities contacted Elisabetta to request a DNA sample to conclusively confirm that the body entombed in the wall was her daughter's. However, there was little doubt, as the remains bore some tattoos that had been reported as distinguishing features when the disappearance was initially filed. A Spanish team traveled to Elisabetta's home to collect a saliva sample, and the DNA comparison left no room for doubt. The body was indeed that of Sabora Gagani, who had gone missing at 22 and would have been 31 at the time of discovery. After the autopsy, it was revealed that despite the condition of the remains, the cause of death had been multiple stab wounds. More than 5 months after Sabora's remains were found in the wall of the apartment she had shared with the man who would become her executioner, her family announced that she would be coming home. Finally, Sabora's family and friends were able to bid her a final farewell in a funeral service. At the end of the service, friends of the young woman released balloons into the sky with messages written for someone who had once been a cheerful, good friend who only dreamed of becoming a model and finding happiness. After enduring the hardest moment a family can face, all efforts were now focused on ensuring that justice was served and that the person responsible for Sabora's untimely death would be punished to the fullest extent of the law. On Tuesday, January 30th, 2024, Marco was testifying before the court in a hearing requested by his defense attorney. However, instead of speaking, he handed over a 17-page handwritten letter in which he admitted responsibility for Paula's death, but with notable caveats. In the letter, Marco claimed that he and Paula had a tumultuous relationship fueled by large amounts of alcohol and cocaine, which they both consumed. He confessed to taking Paula's life but alleged that she had been agitated because he owed her 50 euros and she had discovered his infidelity. Marco claimed that his only fault was defending himself too forcefully, though he did not explain how the woman's wounds ended up on her back if the attack was in self-defense. Despite his partial confession, Marco remained silent about Saboura's case, stating only that he had wrapped her body in bags, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, filled the box with lime, and built a false wall to conceal everything. However, he denied being responsible for her death, though he admitted that what he had done was disgusting. Amidst all his lies, Marco claimed that since his arrest, he had experienced a profound spiritual awakening and was now deeply remorseful. Marco claimed that members of the Albanian mafia were responsible for the death of Saboura. According to his twisted story, these dangerous men had loaned him 25,000 euros to start a business, specifically a brothel. However, Marco claimed that some Colombians had stolen the money after a night of partying, leaving him without the funds to start the business and unable to repay the loan. One day, the Albanian mobsters showed up at his home to collect the debt. There were 4 armed men. One pointed a gun at Marco while the other 3 confronted Saboura. Marco claimed that during the heated exchange, one of the mobsters attacked and killed Saboura. He added that the mobsters took 9,000 euros he had stashed in the house from his small-scale drug deals and told him that the rest of the debt would be forgiven if he disposed of Saboura's body. Given the circumstances, Marco agreed to their terms. He claimed he spent 2 days with Saboura's body in the apartment, unsure of what to do, before deciding to wall it up. As of the time of this writing, Marco's fate remains uncertain. The latest information we found was dated May 16, 2024, indicating that the court had decided to proceed with a jury trial for the case of Paula's death on charges of murder and domestic abuse. However, no estimated date has been found for the judicial process concerning Saboura Gagani's case. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. A young son, a devoted brother, a first-generation Irish American. He excelled in academics, thrived as an athlete, and was tirelessly studying to conquer the grueling CPA exam. Chad O'Melia was the embodiment of every parent's dream. But in a shocking twist of fate, this golden boy was found brutally murdered, stabbed over 100 times. What dark forces had turned his promising life into a horrific nightmare? Chad Brandon O'Melia was born on September 27, 1991, in Santa Clarita, a city located north of Los Angeles, California. His father, Sean O'Melia, an Irish construction supervisor, and his mother, Michelle, separated when Chad was just 5 years old. Despite their separation, they worked hard to ensure Chad had a happy childhood. According to those close to him, Chad was a kind young man with a bright smile and boundless energy. He had a great sense of humor and was always responsible and dedicated. His friends saw him as the big brother of the group, always looking out for them without expecting anything in return. Chad developed a passion for American football at a young age and played throughout his teenage years. He continued playing while attending Chico State University, where he studied accounting and eventually graduated. After graduation, Chad moved to an apartment in Thousand Oaks, part of the greater Los Angeles area, taking his dog, Athena, with him. He shared the apartment with a young man named Vinny Oliveira. Alongside working at an accounting firm, Chad was studying to obtain his Certified Public Accountant (CPA) certificate. However, his busy days left him with insufficient sleep at night, leading him to develop a habit of using cannabis to help him sleep. According to Vinny, Chad was often intoxicated when seen at the apartment. Chad didn't hide this from others, and even his parents were aware of his cannabis use. Although they didn't approve, they didn't see it as the worst thing he could be doing. Sean explained in an interview that Chad never smoked when visiting him because he knew Sean disliked it. Sean considered cannabis a dirty substance with a foul smell that changed Chad's personality and decreased his motivation and concentration. Little did Sean expect that Chad's addiction to cannabis would dramatically change his life, all because of a woman he barely knew. Bryn Spoicher was born on January 25, 1991 in Chicago, Illinois. From a very young age, Bryn faced serious health issues that required numerous surgeries and strong medications. These medical procedures and medications severely deteriorated her hearing. At 4 years old, she began using cochlear implants to hear better and also learned to read lips. Her medical condition made her feel isolated and different from others. Throughout her schooling, she was often the only student with hearing loss and would hide her hearing aids to fit in and avoid teasing. As she grew older, she decided to turn this aspect of herself that once embarrassed her into a strength. Bryn pursued a doctorate in audiology at the University of Washington School of Medicine, graduating in the 2010 S. She excelled in her field, with one professor stating that out of the thousands of graduate students he had taught, Bryn stood out as brilliant, and none could surpass her. In August 2017, at the age of 26, Bryn moved to Thousand Oaks and secured a job as an audiologist at UCLA Health, a health system comprising various medical centers, including the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. For almost a year, she lived in a rental apartment that didn't allow pets, so she had to leave her Siberian husky, Arya, with her family in Illinois. It wasn't until April 2018 that she found a place where she could bring her beloved canine companion. Having Arya by her side again significantly improved Bryn's daily life, as she had trained the dog as a service animal 2 years earlier when Arya was just a puppy. Bryn often took Arya for walks at Conejo Creek, a popular park in Thousand Oaks. It was there, at her favorite spot, that she met Chad in late April 2018. According to her account, Chad was the one who initially approached her. On several occasions when their paths crossed, the 26-year-old Chad asked for her phone number, but she declined each time. Eventually, Chad handed her his business card so she could text him if she ever wanted to meet up. That's exactly what Bryn did, and soon they began an informal relationship. They would go out to eat or hang out with friends, and once, they shared a bottle of Irish whiskey while watching their dogs play in the park. Bryn was drawn to Chad's sarcastic humor, which contrasted with his kind and sweet personality. She expressed that although she wasn't sure they'd get along at first, she soon realized they fit together like puzzle pieces. On Sunday, May 27, 2018, the day before Memorial Day, Bryn went out drinking with some friends. Chad contacted her later, inviting her to visit. Around 10:30 p.m., the 27-year-old Bryn arrived at Chad's place with Arya. They spent time together, drinking a bit and chatting with Chad's roommate Vinny. Shortly after midnight, Chad took out his water pipe and loaded it with cannabis. He went out to the balcony to smoke alone, but Bryn soon joined him and asked for a hit. After inhaling, all she felt was a burning sensation in her throat, which made her cough. She told Chad that she had never had good experiences with cannabis, as she never felt its effects as others described. Surprised, Chad loaded the pipe again with even more cannabis, encouraging her to try again to feel the effects. Bryn complied and smoked again. What happened next was so horrific it seemed like fiction. In the early hours of May 28th, the Thousand Oaks police responded to an emergency call made by Vinny. Something terrible was happening at the residence and they needed immediate help. When officers arrived, their body cameras captured the violent scene unfolding inside the apartment. Bryn had savagely attacked Chad with several sharp objects taken from the kitchen and then turned one on herself. The footage is so graphic it has not been released to the public. In an attempt to stop her, officers fired a taser 4 times, but Bryn seemed unaffected by the electric shocks. They then used their batons, striking her 9 times until she finally dropped the weapon. Bryn suffered 5 fractures in one arm and deep cuts on her neck, face, and right hand. She had also attacked her dog, Arya, who fortunately survived. Tragically, Chad was not as lucky. By the time police arrived, he was already lifeless on the floor, with a total of 108 wounds across his body, as later revealed by the forensic report. Bryn was rushed to the hospital and immediately taken into surgery to save her life. The procedure was successful, and she was admitted to the same health center for recovery. Investigators wasted no time and questioned Bryn as soon as she regained consciousness. Still intubated and unable to speak. She responded in writing, briefly recounting that she had told Chad she didn't want to smoke anymore, but he had forced her to do so. This response led detectives to believe that Bryn did not remember her actions, a revelation they decided to share with her a few days later. Once Bryn had sufficiently recovered from her injuries, she was arrested and charged with homicide. The aftermath of the incident impacted not only Bryn, but also her victim and their families. It was Chad's father, Sean, who had to break the tragic news to his ex-wife, Michelle. In an interview, the grieving father chose not to disclose how he delivered the news, as the memory was too painful to revisit. However, he did share that he requested the police allow him to personally inform Michelle, wanting to be there to console and support her. He recalled seeing the moment her soul shattered as he spoke the words. From that moment, Michelle fell into deep depression. Sean reflected that losing a child brings overwhelming guilt and makes one doubt if happiness is ever possible again. This was Michelle's experience, compounded by her type 2 diabetes. After the funeral, she felt she had no right to smile. She refused to let loved ones take photos of her looking happy, believing it would be disrespectful to her mourning and her son. This mindset led her to neglect her health, ceasing her medical treatment. 18 months after Chad's death, Michelle passed away from severe cardiac dysfunction. Tragically, she did not live to see the conclusion of Bryn's trial. Though it's impossible to know, it's likely the delay between the last hearing and the sentencing of the person responsible for her son's death would have caused her even more pain. Sean explained in later interviews that shortly after the legal proceedings against Bryn began, he started receiving notifications that the defense had requested extensions, claiming they needed more time to prepare for trial. These messages arrived at least every 6 months. This situation dragged on for over 5 years, also impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Thus, the first trial hearing did not occur until November 9, 2023. During this initial proceeding, Bryn, fully recovered from her injuries, had the opportunity to testify before the jury and those present in the courtroom. The then 32-year-old woman, equipped with a real-time transcription monitor on both the witness stand and the defendant's bench, shared her story. Bryn recounted her life before describing the events of May 27, 2018. She stated that after encouraging her to smoke a second time, Chad got up to fetch the water pipe. Once loaded, he brought it to her face, insisting she inhale immediately to feel the effects. Bryn explained she felt she couldn't refuse him, admitting he hadn't used physical force, but his persistence frightened her. She revealed that Chad did not always exhibit the sweet demeanor others attributed to him, and that she had seen him in bad moods, which pressured her into compliance. According to Bryn, minutes later she began to feel as if they were trapped in a time loop. The conversation with Chad seemed to repeat endlessly, giving her a constant sense of déjà vu. She lost the ability to form coherent sentences, which caused her anxiety. Seeking relief, she went back inside, lay down on the couch, and closed her eyes to calm herself. She then reported hearing voices in her head and seeing things with her eyes closed that were clearly not there, all while feeling trapped in a never-ending cycle. At some point, Bryn felt she had died, believing she was trapped inside her own corpse. She described seeing and hearing her loved ones mourning her, even feeling hands touching her body. This wasn't the most bizarre experience of that night. She claimed to have had an out-of-body experience, seeing her own body lying on the couch from above. She added that Chad was beside her, crying uncontrollably, and paramedics were attempting to revive her. Before continuing, Bryn clarified that what happened next felt as if she were in a movie, viewing events from the perspective of one of the characters, as if it were happening to someone else, not her. She recounted pushing the chairs aside in the apartment to make her way to the kitchen, where she grabbed 2 knives and threw them forcefully at Chad. She then took 2 more knives and approached one of the dogs, attacking it. Bryn thought she heard Chad ask why she had hurt Athena, but later learned it was Arya. She then walked to where Chad was standing, and just as she raised the knife against him, she lost consciousness completely. Despite this, she continued hearing voices in her head, urging her not to stop. She also heard Vinny, who ran out of the apartment to call the authorities. The hallucinations persisted for what felt like hours, becoming so intense that she ended up cutting her own neck with the knife. After that, everything went black again. Eventually, Bryn regained consciousness, though not fully and not for long. It was not a slow, gradual process, but quite the opposite. She felt the electric shocks from the police taser used to make her drop the knife, and in her delirium, she thought they were using a defibrillator to resuscitate her. She recalled waking up in the hospital when authorities began asking her about what had happened. However, her memories were blurry, and she couldn't distinguish what was real from what she had hallucinated. It wasn't until 2 days later that investigators informed her she had killed Chad. The defense attorney referenced tests conducted on the water pipe after the incident and called another person to explain the results. The expert stated that drug detection tests are not 100% reliable, as some substances might not be immediately identifiable. He asserted that while the report clearly indicated the presence of THC, the main psychoactive component of cannabis, there was a significant possibility the weed had been laced with something else. This was even more probable if Chad had purchased it from an illegal vendor, who might add other substances to enhance effects and reduce costs, despite recreational marijuana being legal in California at that time. Bryn's legal team also highlighted that until then, it had been overlooked that Vinny, Chad's roommate, had smoked the same substance earlier and also experienced hallucinations. Based on this, Bryn's defense portrayed her as an innocent woman with little experience in substance use, who couldn't have known what she was smoking when coerced into it. This was corroborated by testimonies from her acquaintances. Old friends from high school testified that she was never interested in drugs, which was why she had cut ties with some people. A 33-year-old woman named Amy Carriwick, who met Bryn in 2007, mentioned they bonded over shared interests in high school. She noted that while Bryn played basketball, she played softball, and they both enjoyed activities typically unpopular among girls like camping and hiking. Bryn first smoked marijuana in 2014 when she started dating a man named Kevin, with whom she had a 3-year relationship. The couple took a joint to a mountain campsite in Washington and decided after smoking that it wasn't for them. Kevin, a personal trainer and ex-Marine, believed Chad could have coerced her into smoking that night. He explained that they broke up in 2017 when Bryn moved to California, but described her as carefree, charismatic, and pleasant. It was logical for the defense attorneys to base their strategy on these arguments, as California's penal code stipulates that individuals under the influence of drugs or alcohol are fully responsible for their actions unless they were forced or deceived into intoxication. Despite their efforts, the jury ultimately rejected this argument. The statement Bryn had given to the police while still hospitalized became the primary issue facing the prosecutor and the defense. The accused had initially provided a written statement confessing that she had voluntarily taken the second hit from Chad's pipe. She claimed this document had been concealed from the prosecution for a time. Moreover, in one of the hearings, the prosecutor unveiled new evidence that could potentially turn the trial around. She portrayed Bryn in a starkly different light than the defense did, supporting her argument with a series of text messages exchanged in 2018 between Bryn and several friends. In these communications, Bryn referenced getting so drunk that she had to miss work the next day and mentioned consuming cannabis-infused foods. This served as a basis for the prosecutor to question not only Bryn's original statement, but also all her testimonies. The prosecutor emphasized that Bryn had not mentioned to investigators or doctors that she had been pressured or intimidated during most of her interviews. Bryn responded to both allegations. She explained that she tended to exaggerate her experiences when talking to friends, but had never been so drunk as to black out or miss work due to a hangover. She added that she had only been late to work once after a night out drinking. Regarding the interrogations, Bryn stated she hadn't shared all the information with the police in each interview because she assumed the detectives already knew everything after repeating the same answers multiple times. To counter the prosecution's claims, the defense hired mental health experts who determined that Bryn had not suffered from any mental illness, problems, or violent tendencies before the attack, suggesting that a marijuana-induced psychotic episode was the only explanation for her actions. This argument undermined the prosecutor's case, leading the jury to reduce the charge. On December 1, 2023, after 4 hours of deliberation, Bryn was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter instead of the initial charge of murder. The verdict was a shock to the victim's family and friends. On January 22, 2024, the day before the sentencing hearing, they gathered in front of the county government building, demanding a sentence fitting the severity of Bryn's crimes. On January 23, 2024, the courtroom was filled with spectators, journalists, and family members. The room was so crowded that staff had to place people in the jury box and even had some standing in the aisle. Amid sobs, Bryn took the stand one last time to apologize to Chad's family, especially his father, who had endured the ordeal without the support of Chad's mother. However, the most emotional moment of the hearing came when Chad's paternal grandmother read a statement she had written. The elderly woman addressed Bryn, expressing forgiveness for what she had done, adding that if she couldn't forgive her, God wouldn't forgive her either. After nearly 6 years of waiting, the judge sentenced Bryn to 2 years of probation instead of the 5 years in prison she faced after being found guilty in December 2023. As part of her punishment, she was required to complete 100 hours of community service to raise awareness about cannabis-induced psychosis. She was warned that violating the terms of her probation could result in imprisonment. Following the verdict, Sean criticized the judge for what he perceived as a biased decision influenced by the defendant's gender and race. He also expressed concern about the message this decision sent regarding marijuana use, feeling it gave consumers a green light to justify illegal actions. Lastly, he suggested that Bryn should be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation to study her brain's unique chemistry, believing that the drug alone wasn't the sole cause of the alleged psychotic episode and hoping an investigation might clarify it. The prosecutor voiced her concerns about the precedent set by the judge's decision, describing the sentence as a mockery of the criminal justice system. She considered this case, marked as involuntary manslaughter, one of the most atrocious and violent cases in her 29-year career seeking justice. The tragic end of Chad and the lenient sentence given to Bryn sparked a debate on recreational cannabis use. A famous forensic psychiatrist noted that the increasing acceptance of cannabis in society led to misinformation about its associated risks. He pointed to various studies showing a clear link between cannabis use and psychosis, though he admitted it doesn't occur in 100% of cases. As the legal system faced criticism for its handling of the case, society reflected on the risks associated with cannabis use, questioning whether marijuana is truly a catalyst for violence or merely a trigger among a broader set of circumstances or pre-existing medical conditions. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On a quiet October afternoon in 2005, a tragic accident shattered the lives of everyone involved. 14-month-old Kyle Lazarchik was found unresponsive in his home, his tiny body marked with mysterious injuries. The young nanny, Ada Quadros, frantically dialed 911, but what happened next would change her life forever. As paramedics raced to the scene, the grim reality of Kyle's condition became evident. Despite Ada's desperate attempts to save him, the baby's injuries were severe. But what could have caused such a tragedy? The answers seemed elusive. Ada Quadros was born on September 13, 1977, in the coastal town of Chimbote, Peru. She was the first child of Victor Quadros, a veterinarian, and Luz Fernandez, a teacher. Ada was the eldest of 4 siblings and consistently excelled academically, even winning knowledge contests. She had a happy childhood filled with dreams of self-improvement. Ada later recounted that she spent much of her childhood with one of her sisters on their grandparents' farm, enjoying the close connection with nature and animals. This period was one of the happiest times of her life. Although Ada's family wasn't poor, they were not wealthy either. During her teenage years, she looked for ways to contribute financially. Together with her sister and a friend, she formed a group to entertain at children's parties. After high school, Ada enrolled in a private university to study law. Unfortunately, her financial situation did not allow her to continue, and she had to drop out. Despite this setback, Ada was determined to succeed and support her family. With this goal in mind, she applied for a U.S. visa through the lottery program. Like many young people from Peru and other Latin American countries, Ada saw the United States as a land of opportunities. She was determined to move there, work hard, earn a better income, and pave the way for a brighter future for herself and her family. Her family was thrilled for her. They sold some belongings and did everything possible to gather enough money for her journey. Her destination was Texas, where she initially planned to stay with some relatives. In early 2004, she began working as a waitress in a restaurant. After some time, she joined a company that placed nannies in households. This is how she met the Lazarkic family. The Lazarkic family consisted of Father Michael, commonly known as Mike, Mother Renee, their eldest daughter Alyssa, and twin boys Ryan and Kyle. Little is known about the family's background except that they married in 2000. Shortly after their wedding, Renee became pregnant with their first daughter, Alyssa. Just 4 months after Alyssa's birth, Renee was expecting again, this time with twins Kyle and Ryan. The Lazarkic couple wanted to hire a trustworthy nanny to take care of the twins when Renee returned to work. Alyssa was already comfortable in a daycare she attended daily, where she had made several friends, so they decided she would continue going there. The couple interviewed several candidates, and Ada stood out as the best option. At 27 years old, she was young but not a teenager. She appeared healthy, strong, well-mannered, and cheerful. Renee wanted Ada to start immediately so she could spend a few weeks with her, explaining the household routines, where things were, and what was expected of her. She also wanted to observe how Ada handled the young twins, who were just over a year old. The family had one specific request. They needed assurance that Ada could commit to staying with them for 18 months, and Ada committed to this arrangement. Initially, it was agreed that she would only spend the day at the Lazarkic household, but after some time, they asked her to live in, and Ada agreed. From then on, she only left on weekends to stay at her uncle's house. Everything seemed to go smoothly. The Lazarkic family was pleased with Ada's work and grew fond of her, trusting her completely. Numerous photos captured happy moments with the smiling young nanny holding the twins. However, everything changed in the summer of 2005. Ada informed the Lazarkic family that her uncles were returning to Peru before moving on to Germany. Ada was prepared to go with them and had already purchased her plane ticket for October 29th of that year. Understandably, this was disappointing news for the couple since it was not what they had agreed upon. Eventually, they understood and only asked Ada to stay until they could find a replacement. They even requested her help in searching for and selecting her successor. Ada agreed, but from that point on, she no longer stayed overnight at the Lazarkic home. Instead, she returned to her uncle's house each night and came back early in the morning. Given the change in circumstances and Ada's impending departure, the Lazarkic family scheduled interviews with several nanny candidates for Wednesday, October 12th. During the day, Renee called Ada and asked her to prepare macaroni and cheese for the children. Ada complied and fed the kids. When Renee returned home, she greeted her children, saw they were well, and after interviewing the candidates, spent over an hour with her little ones before they went to bed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, at 5 a.m. on Thursday, October 13th, Kyle woke up crying, which was unusual. The twins were typically heavy sleepers and never woke up on their own. It always took someone to wake them. Nonetheless, Renee got up, went to the twins' room, picked up Kyle, and soothed him until he fell back asleep. She then returned to bed. 2 hours later, at 7:30, Mike went to the children's room, woke them up, hugged and kissed them, and left them in Ada's care before heading to work. Renee woke up just before 9:30 and spent some time with the twins. She changed Ryan's diaper, said goodbye to both him and Kyle, and left for work. The children were fine, with nothing out of the ordinary except Kyle's early wake-up. That day, their older sister Alyssa went to daycare as usual. But things took a dramatic turn around 1 p.m. when Ada called 911, highly agitated, saying that one of the children, Kyle, had stopped breathing and was turning blue. After providing the address, the operator gave Ada instructions to perform CPR on the child. Ada followed the instructions while paramedics were on their way. A few minutes later, they arrived at the house and took over Kyle's care. They asked Ada what had happened, and she, very distressed, explained that after lunch she had put Kyle in his crib and returned to get his brother. But when she got back with Ryan, Kyle started vomiting and stopped breathing. While paramedics attended to Kyle, Ada called Renee to inform her of the situation, giving her a different version of events. She said that after feeding the children, she took Kyle out of his high chair and, as usual, placed him on the playroom floor while she fetched his brother. But when she returned, Kyle was vomiting. She went to the kitchen to get a bowl to catch the vomit, and when she returned, Kyle had fallen. She said she picked him up, took him to the sink, and performed the maneuver Renee had taught her in case one of the children stopped breathing. But it didn't work, and she also attempted CPR. After initial treatment, the paramedics transported Kyle to the nearest hospital. When Renee arrived at the house, the ambulance with her son had already left, but the police were still at the scene. Renee took Ryan, the other twin, and asked Ada to accompany them. They followed the police, who escorted them to the hospital. During the drive, Renee called her husband and they met at the medical center. A few minutes later, the doctors decided to transfer Kyle by helicopter to the Dallas Children's Hospital. The Lazarkicks returned home, left Ada to care for Ryan, and headed to the Dallas Children's Hospital. Ada asked them to keep her informed about Kyle's condition. On the way to the hospital, Renee started worrying that Ada might be too nervous to look after Ryan properly, so she called a friend to assist the nanny at the house. Shortly after, her friend arrived at the house. Ada, visibly distressed and crying, opened the door for her. She asked Ada to explain what had happened. According to her account, Ada said that Kyle was standing between the playroom and the kitchen when he suddenly collapsed. Ada claimed she dropped a plate she was holding, picked Kyle up, took him to the living room, and performed CPR on him. She recalled Ada mentioning that Kyle's brain hadn't fully developed and that this issue had started at birth. She didn't fully understand, but Ada kept talking, saying she loved Kyle and would never hurt him. She tried to calm the very upset nanny, reassuring her that she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was a good person. Meanwhile, at the Dallas Children's Hospital, the Lazarkick family received devastating news. The doctor in charge of Kyle reported that the child had suffered severe head injuries, with multiple bruises on his head, arm, and left shoulder. A neurosurgeon met with the distressed parents to explain that something had to be done to relieve the pressure on Kyle's brain, though survival was unlikely. A child abuse specialist who also met with Mike and Renee suggested that Kyle's injuries could be consistent with abuse. The specialist stated that Kyle's injuries were so severe, it was as if he had been in a car accident or fallen from a 6th floor. Initially, Renee couldn't believe it. She thought Ada might have accidentally dropped the child or was too scared or ashamed to admit it. But the doctors clearly explained the extent of Kyle's head injuries and the force required to cause them. With this information, the possibility of an accident seemed implausible. Renee immediately called another friend to pick up Ryan and take him away from the house. While this was happening at the hospital, Ada became increasingly anxious at home. Renee's friend had to leave to pick up her son from school and take him home. During her absence, Ada called her several times, asking if there was any news about Kyle. When Renee's friend returned to the house, she found Ada calm. Ada was no longer crying or talking. Shortly after, a police car drove by the house. Upon seeing it, Ada lost her composure. She began crying uncontrollably and shouting, "No! No! No!" She collapsed to the floor behind a door, repeatedly insisting she would never harm Kyle. Two female detectives arrived to interview Ada as the person who had called 911 about the injured child. She had been the only adult present when the incident occurred. As the detectives located the house and got out of their patrol car, they heard Ada's cries. Upon entering, they found her extremely agitated. When Ada was able to speak, she explained that she had taken Kyle out of his high chair and placed him on the playroom floor. She was patting his back to help him burp when he suddenly began to vomit. Ada said she went to the kitchen to get a container to catch the vomit, as Renee disliked stains on the floor. While she was cleaning, Kyle turned blue, fell, and started convulsing. She claimed she took him to the living room, called 911, and followed the dispatcher's instructions. During the interview, the other officer called the hospital to get an update on Kyle's condition. When they discovered the diagnosis, detectives told Ada that her story did not account for the injuries Kyle had. Ada suggested that Kyle might have hit his head when he fell after she left him alone in the playroom. But the officers noted that the playroom floor was covered with soft rugs, making this explanation unlikely. Trying to offer another explanation, Ada said that Kyle might have hit his head on the door frame when she carried him on her hip. At the officer's insistence, Ada demonstrated how Kyle could have been hurt and mentioned that Mike and Renee often bumped Kyle's head without any problems. The officer checked the spot where Ada claimed Kyle hit his head but found no evidence of a strong impact. When the officers told her that the injury didn't seem severe enough to cause the extensive damage the doctors described, Ada insisted that the impact was strong because she was running with Kyle in her arms. She also stated that she had never shaken or hit either of the twins. The officers urged Ada to tell the truth, as it could save Kyle's life, but Ada provided no further explanation. Given the circumstances, the officers reported the situation to their command and took Ada into preventive custody for further questioning. Meanwhile, crime scene investigation units arrived to examine the house. After completing their task, they informed Renee's friend, who had stayed at the house on behalf of the owners, that they could clean up and organize everything for the family's return. While several friends cleaned the house, they found a piece of adhesive tape sticking out from the door of a cabinet under the kitchen island. When they opened the door, they noticed it was broken and held together by tape. As a result, opening it caused the door to become misaligned. They simply placed it back and secured it with the tape, but found it strange because Renee was always careful with broken items to prevent the children from getting hurt. They had a hunch and called the police to report the door. Shortly after, investigators returned to collect potential evidence. Later, when questioned about the cabinet door, Renee stated that she frequently used that door and had never seen it held with adhesive tape. By Friday, October 14th, all of Mike and Renee's hopes had vanished. The doctors informed them that Kyle was brain dead and had no chance of recovery. Amid indescribable pain, the couple authorized the removal of life support, after which Kyle passed away. 3 days later, on October 17th, the detectives interviewed Ada in prison, where she was accused of premeditated assault on a minor. This time, Ada claimed that the day before the incident, she was preparing the macaroni and cheese that Renee had requested. She had Kyle sitting on the kitchen counter, and the child fell, landing head first on the kitchen floor and hitting his head hard. Ada said she picked him up and checked for injuries. The only thing she noticed was redness on his ear and the right side of his head, so she applied cold compresses and gave him a pain reliever. When the interrogators asked why she hadn't told this to the other officers, Ada said she thought they wouldn't believe her. She mentioned that she didn't tell Renee because when she arrived home from work, she complained of a severe headache. Ada said Renee suffered from migraines and had requested that the lights be turned off and the house be kept quiet. The interrogators asked if she had fallen with the child, which she adamantly denied. During that interrogation, Ada learned that Kyle had died, and she cried for the rest of the interview. Ada was brought before the courts, where a judge charged her with aggravated homicide and set bail at $750,000, which was beyond the means of Ada or her family, so she remained in custody until the trial. At that time, the police indicated that she might be charged with premeditated actions, which could carry the death penalty. The case of Kyle's death went to trial in the second half of 2005. The doctor who examined Kyle at Dallas Children's Hospital testified that when he received Kyle, the child was already unconscious. He described multiple hematomas on the right side of Kyle's head, as well as bruises on the left side of his head and shoulder and both arms. Additionally, there were 2 small hemorrhages forming hematomas on the right temple. Kyle had 3 main areas of hematomas on his head, indicating 3 separate impacts. He added that the bruises were relatively recent, one possibly 12 to 16 hours old. Internally, Kyle had brain and retinal bleeding, indicative of severe trauma, even though there were no broken bones. The brain tissue was notably swollen, and the pressure inside Kyle's head was 90 millimeters of mercury, whereas the normal level is 20 millimeters. Based on these findings, he concluded that Kyle had suffered severe traumatic events consistent with blunt force trauma, possibly from someone hitting his head against a hard object. He suggested the type of injuries could result from shaking and swinging a young child's head against a solid object, like a kitchen cabinet door. A Dallas County forensic expert testified that the autopsy revealed multiple overlapping small hematomas on Kyle's scalp, along with a couple of punctate abrasions on the right temple, separated by over a centimeter. There were also 4 or 5 pairs of similar lesions on his head. His brain showed significant hemorrhage and swelling, with retinal hemorrhages in both eyes, requiring substantial force to cause such injuries. She concluded that the cause of death was severe head injuries from blunt force trauma, agreeing that Kyle's head might have been struck multiple times against the wooden door of the kitchen cabinet. She ruled out the possibility that Kyle had merely bumped into a door frame or fallen from the kitchen counter. Another critical testimony came from a forensic analyst who measured the distance between the fasteners on the broken kitchen cabinet door and found it matched the punctate abrasions on Kyle's head. This expert also analyzed the adhesive tape used to repair the cabinet door and discovered 2 DNA traces, one of which had a much higher contribution and matched Ada's DNA. The lesser trace could not be identified. After hearing from the experts, it was Mike's turn to testify. He stated that Kyle was fine on the night of October 12th and the morning of October 13th with no bruises. He also mentioned that he prepared breakfast that morning, opening and closing the kitchen cabinet doors to get utensils and food, and that all doors were in perfect condition, including the one later found inexplicably repaired with tape. The parents shared that they had breakfast with the children and played with blocks, with the twins crawling around a playhouse. Based on all the evidence, it was easy to conclude that the events leading to Kyle's death occurred when no other adults were in the house except Ada. The case prosecutor stated that the exact circumstances of what happened to Kyle might never be known for sure, but based on the evidence presented at trial, she painted a possible scenario. Perhaps Kyle didn't want to eat his lunch, and Ada, feeling frustrated or distracted by watching a soap opera, might have taken him out of his high chair without noticing the cabinet door was open. The prosecutor speculated that Ada's rage might have triggered the vicious attack on Kyle's head using the cabinet door until it broke, with the door's screws leaving marks on the child. After all the testimonies and closing arguments, the jury went to deliberate. Upon returning, they found Ada Quadros guilty of capital murder of a child under 6 years old. As the verdict was read, Ada's mother, Luz Fernandez, who had traveled from Peru when her daughter was arrested, stood up and shouted that she would free Ada because she was innocent. She proclaimed that there was no evidence to convict her daughter and vowed to start over and appeal. After the jury members left, Kyle's parents showed photographs and videos of their deceased son, recounting his brief 14 months of life from birth to the last photo taken days before his death. Family members spoke about Kyle, while others simply couldn't stop crying. Ada was sentenced the following year in 2006 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Ada and her family, giving up was not an option. Her parents immediately started a campaign to appeal the sentence, arguing that Ada's conviction was based on racial prejudice and ineffective public defense. However, appealing required money for legal representation and process costs, which the family did not have. Undeterred, they sought support from various sources, including the Peruvian government, the Peruvian and Latino communities in the United States, and solidarity organizations in Peru. In prison, Ada maintained her innocence and took every opportunity for interviews to assert it. Their persistence paid off, and in 2009, Ada's legal representation filed an appeal, citing 5 specific errors in the initial trial. After reviewing the case, the appeals court dismissed 3 of the claims but agreed with 2. This was enough for the judges to overturn the conviction and annul the trial due to irregularities. Following this decision, Ada's family began another fundraising effort to cover the $100,000 needed for a new trial. It took another 3 years to prepare for the new trial, which began on July 10, 2012, with the selection of 12 jurors from over 100 candidates. The trial took place in Collin County's Justice Hall. The defense argued that Kyle had fallen from the kitchen counter on October 12th, injuring his head, and the situation worsened the next day when Ada, running with the child in her arms, accidentally struck his head on the doorframe. This time, the defense presented testimony from a forensic expert with 40 years of experience. He suggested that some of Kyle's bruises might have been caused at the hospital during catheter insertion to assess brain swelling. The prosecution fiercely challenged this testimony. David Gardner, an employee of the kitchen cabinet manufacturer, also testified for the defense. He proposed alternative explanations for the broken cabinet door, though he didn't entirely rule out that Kyle's head could have been struck against it. A poignant moment in the trial was Mike's testimony, where he described Kyle's last 2 days connected to numerous tubes and machines, eventually being taken off life support and dying in his parents' arms. The defense argued there wasn't enough evidence to convict Ada, but the prosecution highlighted the medical findings and the numerous times Ada changed her story. After the sessions concluded, the jury deliberated for 5 hours, even requesting to listen to the 911 call recordings again. Ultimately, they once again found Ada Quadros, then 33, guilty of capital murder and sentenced her to life imprisonment without parole. Back in prison, Ada joined the prison volleyball team, learned Braille, and won an art contest with a drawing of the Virgin Mary, which she auctioned to raise funds for a new appeal. Ada, from her cell, maintains her innocence, her spirit unbroken as she and her family continue their fight for an appeal, seeking a chance to prove what they believe to be the truth. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.